Welcome to Valor Stories. In each episode, we honor a hero awarded the highest gallantry medal, celebrating their courage and sacrifice. Join us as we bring their legacies alive. David Ernest Hornell was a Canadian recipient of the Victoria Cross, the highest and most prestigious award for gallantry in the face of the enemy that can be awarded to British and Commonwealth forces. Early life. David Ernest Hornell was born on 26th of January 1910 on Toronto Island and spent his childhood and adolescence in Toronto suburbs of Mimico. His combination of excellence in sports and academics resulted in a university scholarship offer. Times were tough, however. The Great Depression was just beginning, so Hornell took a job with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Hornell also taught Sunday school at Wesley United Church. David's mother died when he was very young, and he was raised by his aunt Elizabeth Hornell until his father remarried. He attended school in Mimico and was an all-round athlete who particularly enjoyed playing rugby, swimming, and tennis. Military life. In 1941, at the relatively older age of 31, David Hornell enlisted with the Royal Canadian Air Force. He received his pilot's wings that July and was posted to No. 120 Squadron based out of Nova Scotia. Hornell would fly patrols along North America's east coast for the next 2 years, keeping watch for German U-boats that were known to lurk in the Atlantic, waiting to attack convoys headed for Europe. September 1943 saw Hornell transfer to No. 162 Squadron, which was deployed to Reykjavik, Iceland on New Year's Eve. From here, Hornell and company could monitor the passage from North America to Europe for enemy vessels. David Hornell began as a co-pilot before being promoted to pilot in May 1944. Around this time, No. 162 Squadron sent 3 Canso aircraft, including Hornell's, to Wick in northern Scotland, where they were rotated into Allied deployments that monitored the European coastline for U-boat activity. Citation: Flight Lieutenant Hornell was captain and first pilot of a twin-engine amphibian aircraft engaged on an anti-submarine patrol in northern waters. The patrol had lasted for some hours when a fully surfaced U-boat was sighted, traveling at a high speed on the port beam. Flight Lieutenant Hornell at once turned to the attack. The U-boat altered course. The aircraft had been seen and there could be no surprise. The U-boat opened up with anti-aircraft fire, which became increasingly fierce and accurate. At a range of 1,200 yards, the front guns of the aircraft replied. Then the starboard gun jammed, leaving only one gun effective. Hits were obtained on and around the conning tower of the U-boat, but the aircraft itself was hit. 2 large holes appeared in the starboard wing. Ignoring the enemy's fire, Flight Lieutenant Hornell carefully maneuvered for the attack. Oil was pouring from his starboard engine that was, by this time, on fire, as was the starboard wing, and the petrol tanks were in danger. Meanwhile, the aircraft was hit again and again by the U-boat's guns. Holed in many places, it was vibrating violently and very difficult to control. Nevertheless, the captain decided to press home the attack, knowing that every moment the chances of escape for him and his gallant crew would grow more slender. He brought his aircraft down very low and released his depth charges in a perfect straddle. The bows of the U-boat were lifted out of the water. It sank and the crew were seen in the sea. Flight Lieutenant Hornell contrived, by superhuman efforts at the controls, to gain a little height. The fire in the starboard wing had grown more intense, and the vibration had increased. Then the burning engine fell off. The plight of the aircraft and crew was now desperate. With the utmost coolness, the captain took his aircraft into wind, and despite the manifold dangers, brought it safely down on the heavy swell. Badly damaged and blazing furiously, the aircraft rapidly settled. After ordeal by fire came ordeal by water. There was only one serviceable dinghy, and this could not hold all the crew, so they took turns in the water, holding onto the sides. Once the dinghy capsized in the rough seas and was righted only with great difficulty. 2 of the crew succumbed from exposure. An airborne lifeboat was dropped to them but fell some 500 yards downwind. The men struggled vainly to reach it, and Flight Lieutenant Hornell, who throughout had encouraged them by his cheerfulness and inspiring leadership, proposed to swim to it, though he was nearly exhausted. He was with difficulty restrained. The survivors were finally rescued after they had been in the water for 21 hours. By this time, Flight Lieutenant Hornell was blinded and completely exhausted. He died shortly after being picked up. Flight Lieutenant Hornell had completed 60 operational missions, involving 600 hours flying. He well knew the dangers and difficulties attending attacks on submarines. By pressing home the skillful and successful attack against the fierce opposition, with his aircraft in a precarious condition, and by fortifying and encouraging his comrades in the subsequent ordeal, this officer displayed valor and devotion to duty of the highest order. He died on June 24, 1944 at age 34 that day and was buried in the Shetland Islands, Scotland. Legacy: David Hornell Junior School, an elementary school in Mimico, is named after him. The Canso aircraft in the collection of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario, was restored in the colors and markings of 162 Bomber Reconnaissance Squadron and dedicated to the memory of Flight Lieutenant David Hornell, VC. A Toronto Island Airport ferry is named after Hornell. Flight Lieutenant David Ernest Hornell's Victoria Cross is on display at the 1 Canadian Air Division Headquarters Museum in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thank you for your time watching Valor Stories. Subscribe and share to honor these heroes. Until next time, remember their courage.